in our political environment, well, it's always been present in the historical realm. And then also to portray nostalgia. A lot of people look back fondly on what's gone because of personal association.
Sorry.
I think the image I published that got the most attention was the clown sign in Middletown. So one never knows what's going to resonate with the public, and it is as likely going to be a fun image as something important historically. And then the book will depict lifestyle changes. Changes are continual in where we live, the retail environment, how we work, and it's still ongoing. I saw something online recently about people complaining about the changes in Red Bank. Well, things have always changed. Perhaps the penchant for nostalgia is a reluctance to let go of our youth, but whatever, there are some fine nostalgic scenes in this book. And then also to celebrate preservation. Something can be lost in the sense of its original purpose, but still standing on the ground. So let's take a look at the actual, now the forward.
Let's see.
All right, we have the picture.
Wow.
I hit the forward arrow, which is usually the extent of my involvement with the computer when I speak.
And I just clicked on here.
And we also, oh, okay, this message is not on the screen. Well, as long as it doesn't show on the screen, that's all right. I know what the images are.
Okay.
This is Matt Salisbury's reservation. It has a long history that is rife with rumor, misinformation, and fabrication that demands accuracy. The Long Branch oceanfront between Troutman Avenue on the north and, well, some distance on the south, used to be the site of his housing colony. One of these houses is gone now. You can see its location next to the ocean. Not a very good place for having any house, let alone those with the lawns. Salisbury was born in Illinois in 1846. He was a Civil War veteran. He was seriously wounded, but he had a fine personality that allowed him to hone his acting skills while in the Army. His greatest accomplishment would be the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. Salisbury met William E. Cody in the early 1880s, an encounter that led to the major work of Salisbury's career, the promotion management of the Buffalo Bill Wild West shows. While Cody was responsible for the vaudeville stage recreations and reminiscences of his exploits in the unsettled West, management by Salisbury made the show an international success. Numerous European venues included the Vatican and Windsor Castle. Salisbury's long and often contentious relationship with Cody became breached in the 1890s with litigation that extended beyond Salisbury's death. Salisbury produced one more exotic show, Black America, spectacular in his time, racist in ours. The Times headline of May 25, 1895, opening tells more than one can embrace now. Wild Negro chants and dances. In Black America, Brooklyn may be seen, the fun-living darky of old slavery days. Ironically, the show opened at Ambrose Park, South Brooklyn, where, during the prior year, the Wild West show had been performed. The show was later mounted at Madison Square Garden. Salisbury came to Long Branch from his key assistant, Frank Muir. He lived on Liberty Street. One of the false rumors involving him is where he actually lived. There's someone in Long Branch claiming that he lives in Salisbury's own house. He didn't. So I asked him, what makes you think Salisbury owned this place? Well, he had a picture of him with someone else in the backyard. That's what historians have to cope with.
That Black American show, when was that? That's about what year?
Well, you're gonna have to get the book. 1895.
Okay.
Oh, okay, it moved. How about that? The Franklin Cottage, associated with the Elberon Hotel, is widely recognized as a place where President Garfield died. Although little is known about Charles Gilbert Franklin or the hotel. Let's get a little more detail on that. Franklin was born in 1844 near Newcastle, England, a son of Colonel Gilbert and Jane Cunard Franklin. His mother was a daughter of Samuel Cunard, the founder of the steamship line. Franklin, employed by Cunard at age 16 in Halifax, Canada, became the firm's agent in New York in 1875, following the death of his father-in-law. His tenure with Cunard firm may have been brief, as Franklin was involved with industry later in the decade. The relationship became strained over later debt issues. Franklin bought 3 lots on November 12, 1872, from Theodore G. Thomas. The lots were located on the Lewis B. Brown tract, Elberon, at the corner of Ocean and Lincoln Avenues. Franklin hired Charles McKim to design his residence, built in 1876. The rumors on McKim are so rife that there are mistaken citations to the architect being his later partner, Stanford White. Unfortunately, Stanford White had more commissions that he never built than were actually built, but we still have a very small number here in Monmouth County. Now, the place was associated with the Elberon Hotel. The hotel originated as 2 cottages that were joined together. They were probably built at the behest of Lewis B. Brown. Lewis B. Brown, the namesake of Elberon. The place was expensive and exclusive. Let's get a little detail on that, or is it going to be all me? Well, let's talk about Garfield. I think it was well known that Garfield was shot by an assailant in 1881. He was brought to Long Branch with the hope that the salubrious seaside air would do him some good. He had been in Long Branch previously, and he liked the place. There's a well-documented account how a spur railroad line was built from the local track to the foot of the Garfield cottage. But unfortunately, Garfield's medical treatment is likely what did him in. The hotel is worthy of note. The hotel, rather than having been purpose-built as a hotel, was put together by the combining of 2 cottages, probably accomplished by Franklin at the behest of Brown. The hotel, after it opened for the 1878 season, became the most exclusive and costliest in Long Branch. Its appeal stemmed in large part from its location in Elberon, the southern district of Long Branch, a locale some distance from the hotel district. The only other hotel in its class, the Hollywood Hotel, was in nearby West End on a track west of the shore. Now, Elberon still is the best section of Long Branch. I cannot imagine there being a resident of Elberon who will say, oh, I live in Long Branch rather than I live in Elberon. So now, let's look at a couple of mansions. Awe-inspiring, are they? These two mansions were built by Cornelius Kingsland Garrison and his son William. Each was the most pretentious house in Elberon in their times. Cornelius's house is more often associated with the person who destroyed it, while William's brief ownership, the one on the right, was tragic. Cornelius was born in 1809 in upstate New York. He went to California for the gold rush. He made a fortune in transportation and finance. He became the mayor of San Francisco. He returned to New York, and in 1881, he built this house on the left that he called a marine villa. It's not the name of the place, but that's what he called it for its proximity to the sea and for that tall observation tower. The three-story house, no doubt the costliest to date in Long Branch, was perhaps called a marine villa for proximity to the water and over the 70-foot tower on the south end that contained an observatory at its peak. It's 35 rooms finished in ash, mahogany, and California redwood, included a smoking room and another for billiards. The latter measuring 35 by 25 feet. The architect is unknown, but the owner may have been the inspiration for its minarets and Moorish tower. Kingsland, who had studied architecture, may have been enamored by the Moorish revival style that enjoyed a brief spell of interest in the post-Civil War years, although rarely in residential construction. Evidence is offered by the Moorish-influenced tower built in his monument at his grave site, Greenwood Cemetery, Brooklyn, which is pictured in the book. It seems to me that this could have been designed by an amateur who had a plan book, because he seems to have taken one motif of everything that was in style at the time. Some people confuse size with artistry. This was certainly spectacular from a size standpoint and a cost standpoint, but artistically, I don't think it makes it. Now, the place was later owned by Solomon Guggenheim, the famed copper family, and who has a namesake museum in New York. He wanted to develop the property or turn it into a hotel. He was denied, and he raised the place. He had his ownership had an interesting issue with the state of New Jersey on taxes, and it's outlined in the book. This is the Seabrook Wilson house. It has an infamous name that will never die. And by putting this in the book, I am violating one of my basic guidelines for depicting history. Don't deny anything, because if you do, it will only reinforce the rumor. And the rumors on this place that was called the Spy House, and it will probably be called the Spy House as long as there are little kids who went there on school trips and were entertained by the curator, and that includes mine. But nevertheless, the spying story was made up out of whole cloth. The building was formerly the White House Tavern. was acquired by the township of Middletown in the late 1960s. White House wasn't a particularly attractive name for it. Stewardship was turned over to the Middletown Township Historical Society, who wanted a name with a greater appeal. So they made up Spy House out of whole cloth, but it stuck. It was enormously popular in its time. The oldest part of the house was built around 1720. It had a very prominent owner, William V. Wilson. And it was done in by the excesses of the curator, who established ghost tours there. There were considerable financial irregularities at the time, and finances at the museum were always in question, but the ghost tour issue got to be so bad that her role there was terminated. The township traded the building for other land considerations to the county of Monmouth. The township had made some efforts at preserving the place. Many of the repairs were faulty, but the county of Monmouth has done a fantastic job in restoring it. Drive-in movies.
Oh my God.
Drive-ins were a New Jersey innovation. They did have antecedents called airdromes, which were open-air theaters, a number of which were built here. Obviously, they were used only in the summer. The first legitimate drive-in, actual drive-in, was opened in 1933 in Camden by a Ralph Hollingshed, who began merely by putting a projector on top of a car. It worked for a while, but later they developed a ramp system. There were about 40 in New Jersey. And New Jersey was a popular place for them because we had accessible highways with available space. The last was in Hazlitt, built in 1956. It closed September 4th, 1991. And drive-ins were pretty convenient. You didn't have to have a babysitter. It was easy in, easy out. The kids could be entertained in the parks that invariably accompanied these. And I think anyone that visited a drive-in will attest to their benefit and favorable role at the time. And I imagine there are a number of us in that circumstance right here. Cowboy City.
Oh my goodness.
Mythology characterized the telling of the settlement of the Old West, from the earliest writings to recent entertainment. Stereotypes that are colored at best and distorted at worst claim a hollow nobility of the cause, distort a claimed savagery of the Native Americans, and depict unjustified so-called heroism of the cowboys, along with their whiteness. While scholarship of the past several decades has brought historical accountability to the period, the myths and legends will endure as long as memories linger over mid-20th century television shows, children's toy cap gun six-shooters, and visits to recreational sites such as Cowboy City. Now, how did these theme parks on the highway develop? There were a number of them. We're going to see another one as products of their time. And in this one, the theme park presented exciting live action in which one could be a cowboy for a day, join a posse, capture the Dalton gang, lock up a cowboy. or lock up the outlaws and ride the stagecoach as well as the old Copper Creek Railroad. The genuine verisimilitude had one girl recalling 6 days later that she was so frightened during a stagecoach holdup that on seeing the guns she cried out, "Don't shoot!" The second girl made believe she was Annie Oakley and dressed as a cowgirl when visiting. Another kid remembered that having gotten into some unspecified trouble on the coach, he was thrown off and forced to work back. Opened in 1956, it was short-lived, 10 years. It took advantage of the move to the suburbia, the open highway, the need to entertain kids. The property was vacant for a long time. It was eventually developed. It's on Highway 33 in Easton Howell. It's near Colts Neck. I think the residents of the fancy condo colony that was built there, Equestra, likes to think of themselves as Southern Colts Neck.
Hi.
Here's another one of those highway entertainments, Storyland Village on Highway 66 at the Asbury Park Circle. Nostalgia of childhood fairy tales endures in the voices of caregivers, the vividness of the printed page, and memories in the mind. Fortunate children were enlivened by visiting Storyland Village, a child's garden of verses and stories, where gigantic characters dotted an amusement park. At Storyland Village, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, but he did not fall. Well, not until the entire park fell. It was built in 1955 on 54 acres at the Asbury Park Circle, and again appealing to motorists in the same vein as Cowboy City. There was quite a bit to entertain the kids here. The young visitors to Storyland reveled in the presence of literary friends. Red Riding Hood was there along with Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Peter the Pumpkin Eater, and Jack the Giant Killer. Also present were Mistress Mary Quite-Contrary, who watched over her garden, Little Miss Muffet, who ate her curds and whey, accompanied by a spider eager to get beside her, and Little Bo Peep, who lost her sheep. The animals here, constrained by fences, included the 3 little pigs present along with their respective houses. The fences, which held back the dish that ran away with the spoon from Hey Diddle Diddle, were not impenetrable and did not prevent a few notable escapes. The park was big news when it opened on June 18th, 1955. It brought the governor here. One wonders how long it was projected that Storyland Village would last, because as the area developed, these places would succumb to the basic real estate principle of land rising to the highest and best use. Sears was built on the site. And of course, Sears didn't last much longer than Storyland Village. This one is even earlier, Holden's Twin Brook Zoo. A zoo on a highway? Unimaginable. As professionally run zoological parks are under fire now by animal rights advocates. This one was built on over 200 acres of farm, opened or at least acquired in 1919 by Oliver Holden. He was a dealer in exotic birds.
So Randy, this is where Kohl's is now, right?
Yes.
Kohl's department store,
Oh.
that shopping center.
The exotic exhibits would include African lions, Malayan tigers, Indian leopards, black panthers, pumas, wildcats, black Russian and Malayan bears, Indian elephants, zebras, buffalo, elk, and even raccoons. Well, the latter are hardly exotic, as a family of 5 was resident on my property as I was writing this. So he opened in 1925, and it was immediately popular. I mean, it was only the 1920s, but still, automobile ownership was on the uprise. People were getting out onto the roads. The Middletown highways were dotted mainly with farm stands, so this provided a little entertainment. Now, it also made big news, and big news in that time was something that got into the New York papers, when a leopard escaped. It's not known how it broke from its enclosure, but of course a leopard is a wild and deadly animal. And immediate panic went through the area. People with guns were out hunting for the leopard, and there were some that were more afraid of the hunters than the hunted. And a lot of people didn't know what a leopard looked like, so Holton got a stuffed leopard to show the people, this is what you were going after. He was undetected for so long that some thought it was a publicity stunt. But finally he was found. Where? In Ocean County. Unbelievable. How did he get there? The best reasoning is that he followed railroad tracks. But that wasn't the worst of it.
How long was this? How long was he gone?
Months.
Months?
Yeah.
Wait.
Tragedy struck on July 22nd, 1927, when a female lobo wolf that had been raised in captivity and treated by some as if domesticated escaped while being transferred to another enclosure and headed for the nearby Holton residence. There, in concert with the family's German Shepherd, attacked Tommy, the Holton's 2.5-year-old son, fatally wounding him.
What?
A frightened and enraged public wanted the place closed by compulsion if necessary. While the zoo remained open for several weeks, the public was appeased by a despairing and broken Holton, who terminated operations on October 16th, 1927.
Anything to do with the name, were there 2 brooks there?
There were 2 brooks in the area, yes. And it was 2 brooks before it was named for the zoo. Now, one more in the nostalgia reign. Well, I hear a few sounds. People must remember it from passing by. The pirate ship office. Now, let's see how an attention-grabbing real estate office on Highway 45 became a nostalgic symbol to a generation of youths. It was built by Charles Morrissey and Samuel Walker, avid promoters, who even hired airplanes to show people some of their property. Roadside architecture was familiar for much of the first half of the 20th century for what should be the obvious reason. It grabbed attention. And why pirates? Well, the Captain Kidd legend still exists in certain places, and in the area of this, there was even a treasure lake. This was moved a couple of times as Morrissey and Walker had different developments in the area. And I'm going to give a little.
No skull and bones cross.
Excuse me?
No skull and bones flag, that's illegal. No skull and bones flag was flying over this.
It wouldn't surprise me if at some times it did. And, you know, as far as this Captain Kidd goes, someone asked me, a week or so ago, a youngster, was there really a Captain Kidd around here? So he, like the Spy House, may never die in the area. So, shorebound children perceived the pirate ship as a symbol that meant We are almost there, especially if the Cliffwood Beach Boardwalk and beach was the destination. I remember the place during the early 1950s. It was awful. The boardwalk was splintered and the stony rocks in the sand inspired the name Stony Beach. Hurricane Donna wiped out the boardwalk in 1960, although the pirate ship endured. It had various owners, was moved again, was sold, and its last site was in Old Bridge, just north of the Monmouth County border. And finally, in 1993, it was destroyed by fire. The Clearwater Swim Club is on the Middletown stem of the Highway 36 between Atlantic Highlands and Highlands. And now it is a footnote in history that would have been forgotten altogether other than for the presence of one man at one event. Founded in 1959, the place had the usual recreational amenities. Music enlivened some nights, such as September 11th, 1970, when the sounds went on past the 10 p.m. Curfew. What happened that night? The large, enthusiastic crowd was drawn in part by the presence of Steel Mill, Bruce Springsteen's first band, an ensemble that also included drummer Vinnie Mad Dog Lopez and organist Danny Federici. Event sponsors declined to end the music at the appointed hour, prompting co-owner Richard Claver to disconnect the amplifiers. After band members reconnected them, matters got out of control. Police intervention was required to end the event. News reports provide plenty of he said, she said commentary, so the historical overview may be disputed in places. Pushing, shoving, biting, and the throwing of objects ensued. Arrests were made. Accusations of excessive force by the police, several of whom were injured, received post-melee scrutiny. One may presume that officers showed restraint to avoid a riot by a large, aroused crowd of some 3,000 to 4,000 fans, some of whom were upset over the use of force. The 1960s culture wars were at a peak, with authorities dismayed at best or shocked at worst by the use of marijuana, the imbibing of alcohol, and the carrying on of sexual activity. Little came out of the arrests that night. The concerts came to an end, as eventually did the club in 1984. The area was vacant for quite some while. The facilities were raised in 1970, and only in recent years was anything built there, and 2 baseball fields now fill the site. This is the J. Howard Smith fish processing plant located on the Fort Monmouth Raritan Bay benchmark. The industry started small and became a big business. It was easy to get started in the fish oil business, the extracting of useful oil from the inedible Manhattan fish. All you needed were some tanks, a press, and some ways to get the oil and the remaining fish scrap to market. But J. Howard Smith in 1911 made this a big business by buying up all of the little firms. Let's get a little detail on the fish processing business. Fish oil became a raw material in myriad products, including pharmaceuticals, paints, lubricants, soaps, resins, inks, and linoleum. The Canadian and European markets even used it as cooking oil. By 1871, 3 local firms had canned the fish that was bony as well as oily. marketing it as food for humans and aiming to sell to European buyers. Some called the product shadines, although the Manhattan resembled neither a shad nor a sardine. Obviously, it didn't go over well. This was really a dirty and literally a stinky operation. If you lived anywhere near the area, you could tell which way the wind was blowing merely by the odor. This place was an environmental concern before the environment was a concern. It was long involved with authorities in safety and other regulatory issues. Now, what happened to it? The business faded as more effective chemicals were manufactured and sold to replace the product. The business closed around 1984. The plant was raised in 1989, and there are, after quite some years of vacancy, there were fancy and expensive condos built on the site. Many residents probably would be alarmed to realize what had been there. I imagine the smell, however, is long gone.
Oh, oh my goodness,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
It was green though, wasn't it? Wasn't his ketchup green?
Well, let's get into that. His main product was not. This factory was built right on the now and then fancy Sycamore Avenue residential district. It's become legendary as we look back in time, and now ketchup is such an ordinary comment that one would not imagine ketchup had a hazardous history. And yes, the pun of hazardous is intended. Edward Clark Hazard was born in 1831 in Rhode Island, a scion of a very prominent early settler in the area. He came to New York while young. He entered the wholesale grocery business, which is really where he made his money. Now, with respect to the quality of ketchup, regardless of color, but let's note that the early American tomato ketchup product was both dismal and often inedible. A sad state that stemmed from producers' scant interest in quality, along with the difficulty of preserving both harvested processed tomatoes and the finished ketchup. Dishonest processors even cook rotten tomatoes or disguise foul product by adulteration with sugar or preservatives. Practices that made much ketchup unpalatable at best and dangerous at worst. By the 1850s, ketchup lacked consumer acceptance. So what Hazard did and what made him prominent in the business, he established quality control. He packed it in small bottles because it wasn't preserved, and obviously a small bottle is not going to be around, not likely to be around to go bad. He had special equipment installed. He was really a quality conscious manufacturer. His plant burned down. He built a larger one. And the story of Hazard is, and the ketchup plant is so rich and deep. I can only touch on a highlight in the talk. There's more in the book. He died in 1905. The firm failed. Much of the history of the post-Edward era is clouded by myth and rumor. Much of it, I believe, spread by his family.
What happened of the tower?
What happened to the tower?
What's the story about it? Of course, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's quite intriguing.
I don't know. Of course, it burned down and I never saw any
One
Any
of
You mean, what is
reference?
the purpose of the tower?
The purpose of the tower?
Could be where they cooked the tomatoes and the
Um,
steam came up.
You know, that's a good question. I never imagined.
Well, it was more than.
Obviously, they weren't mashing tomatoes by dropping them from the story. It might be worthy of looking. Ketchup hazard was extensively covered in the newspapers.
You can see that that's brick and some of the other structures are wood, so that's maybe where everything was heated and cooked. I don't know, just guess.
Interesting.
John T. Lover Nurseries can merit a book by itself. Wasn't your ordinary nursery. Lover was an innovator who became an industry. He started small, working for the Hans operation in Rumson at the time, in the 1870s, the most prominent nursery in a wide region. He started out small, just leasing to plots of ground. He soon bought land as he succeeded, and he expanded, and he expanded, and he expanded. He innovated new products such as the Catawba grapes here. He was very quality conscious. He designed special packaging materials. He had an extremely wide market. He published attractive catalogs annually, sent them all over the country, and literally was an agricultural industry. Eventually, it faded, and by the third generation, much of the land was being sold off, and you no longer had the same environment for the Lovett type operation.
Whereabouts was it in Little Silver?
At one point, it was he had a place on Church Street, and it went from Church Street to the north and east.
So, but there is a Lovett Street in Little Silver. Was that part of it as well?
That's.
Lovett Street, that was a part of a development. The Lovetts were also active in land development.
Where Cheshire Square was, that was, he had greenhouses there, and where Red Regional High School, he had fields all over.
Okay, because Lovett Street is,
There's North Lovett.
These are table grapes, not wine grapes. Table grapes, not wine grapes.
Yeah. Would anyone drink New Jersey wine?
Yeah.
Then?
so when did the third generation fail? What year was that?
It was sold off around the
During Prohibition or?
70s.
Oh, so later than that.
And eventually, you talk about Lovett Street, if you are going through Colts Neck in the direction of Freehold, there's a Lovett Road off Phalanx Road. That's where they moved their operation to. This is the Nut Swamp Distillery. Now, who can imagine alcohol processing now in a leafy suburban neighborhood? However, the apple was not your ordinary fruit in the 19th century. Why? Well, let's see. Alcohol production from apples, which typically begin with fermented juice, had a New Jersey tradition that dated to early colonial times. The fruit was plentiful, but not easy to transport. while the area was not hospitable for growing quality wine grapes, although Conover at one time made brandy. Some fermented cider was distilled to a product with higher alcohol content, the famed Applejack, popularly known as Jersey Lightning. The start of the season varied depending on the maturity of any given year's crop and could commence by late July. An industry tradition was for a distiller to give a bottle of Applejack to the first farmer who delivered a load of apples. So, in the colonial times, through much of the 19th century, apples weren't eaten. They were drunk. I have a news clipping from a freehold paper from around the 1850s, 60s that is actually titled "Apples as Food." It was a novel idea. I don't know when the popular slogan, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away," originated. Maybe drinking apple brandy had salubrious effects that originated the saying. These distilleries were not rare. There were a number of them in the county. This one was on Middletown, Lincroft Road. There are, let's see, a short distance from this, 3 traffic lanes, 1 a turning lane. The building endured into the 1950s, but was razed. Prohibition didn't help the industry at all. There were World War I alcohol restrictions, and after Prohibition, the Laird industry, which can be examined in some detail in my Colstack book, gathered up a lot of the local producers and established their own standards of quality, and of course are still thriving, although they no longer process apples in New Jersey.
Laird's still makes an apple brandy.
It's a Virginia operation now, and I wonder if they sell more gin and vodka than alcohol, than Applejack. But Applejack, from what I read, is gaining a renewed popularity. Here we have a Red Bank subject. Now, I call them airfields, not airports. There were a few legitimate airports, but an airfield in the early days of aviation was practically any space that was large enough for a small plane to take off and land, such as farmers' fields, many of which were used by aviators, some even with the farmers' permission. There are quite a few of them identified in the book. And in fact, in researching the subject, the location of some of them is so obscure that they couldn't even be positively identified. There were a couple in Spring Lake, and one in Freehold, where the location is obscure. But what happened in Red Bank to give this some legitimacy and to make it an airport? Jack Casey and his brother, in 1919, started out slowly, giving rides, flying lessons, sold aircraft advertising, and eventually built a field on what's actually in Tinton Falls, between Shrewsbury Avenue and Hance Avenue. They built up the place by establishing lights, towers, and equipment, and it became a legitimate airfield. And it endured past the Casey ownership, and It saw military use in World War II. A number of well-known aircraft visited the place at various times, and it was extensively written about in the newspapers. So what happened? It's a subject where the end might be as gripping as the origin. And we'll hear something about how the business developed. In 1967, James Loeb, who had bought the place, organized a taxi operation as Suburban Airlines, which provided regularly scheduled service. The line became a recognized third-level carrier or a regional airline. Safety concerns were spiked by accidents that preceded the reorganization. They would continue both in proximity to the airport and elsewhere. A crash in Raritan Bay on April 23, 1960, killed Cornelius Jan Baker of the Netherlands, one of the most highly regarded nuclear physicists in Europe. 3 others were rescued. 4 people were critically injured on November 15, 1964, as a plane crashed on a Shrewsbury residential street. A second crash in the Bay on February 14th killed 2, 1965. 9 people were killed on January 5, 1967, after a plane crashed shortly after takeoff and landed on Hance Avenue. Some subsequent crashes avoided deaths or injuries. The crushing blow came on March 18, 1970, when a Suburban plane returning from Canada crashed while attempting to land at Newark during bad weather, killing all 4 aboard. 3 were executives of Rowan Industries of Oceanport. The 4th was the owner, safety spokesman, and pilot, James Loeb. Airplace activities steadily declined after the death of Loeb and the sale of his airline to Reading Aviation Service of Reading, Pennsylvania. On July 16, 1971, the airport officially closed. And one interesting sidelight, this was used by Dorrance, which had a flying photography service. And they documented for customers much of Monmouth County from their aerial exploits. Urban gentlemen organized the club in 1850 and built a fascinating headquarters on Hartshorn and Middletown property between Upper and Lower Rocky Point on the Navesink. Active on the water. It was quite an organization while it lasted, but this couldn't succeed past the generations either.
Looks more like a cat house.
Yes.
By the 1860s, Neptune included entries from a club-assembled fleet. Some consider the group to have been the region's first yacht club, despite origins as a social organization. The New York Times of August 13, 1955, describes their delightful situation as having been supplied with a steward, waiters, cooks, etc., with full accommodations for the members, including yachts, boats, fishing tackle, etc. Fishing and dining notwithstanding, yachting predominated. In time, the club appointed a commodore and sponsored a Neptune Cup for racing, while a channel on the river to facilitate access to the clubhouse was open. Then activity waned during the 1890s. It was leased to the Hoboken Club for a spell, eventually was abandoned and destroyed by fire on February 17, 1910.
Also known as insurance.
Here's one of our local places, the largest house ever built in Red Bank, erected by Andrew Friedman, little known locally. He settled here for the summer of 1899, purchasing from James Kinney his farm. He lived there for a while, He expanded it and built some other things on the place and then undertook this massive project. He raised the former Kinney Place in 1914 to undertake construction of Red Bank's largest and costliest house, a 107 by 108-foot mansion designed by New York architect Herbert J. Krapp. Depiction of the number of rooms initially described as 50 varied over time. Friedman, who was born in New York in 1860, accumulated a fortune largely through transportation projects that included New York City subway work. He also owned the New York Giants baseball club, which, although a minor aspect of his business career, proved to have been a tempestuous one. In brief, he was reviled by other owners and players. There was a time when I said Friedman was so disliked that he made George Steinbrenner seem warm and fuzzy. The unmarried Friedman died in 1915 before the house was completed. Much of his fortune was left for charitable purposes, including an extant building in New York. Friedman provided for the Andrew Friedman House, erected at 1125 Grand Concourse in the Bronx, a huge facility that offered retirement quarters for the formerly well-off who had fallen on hard. Eventually, it went into other charitable use, and this house was bought by Uzzell McCarter, one of the banking brother of the famed three McCarter brothers, who occupied the place. He had already owned a fancy house on Rumson Road. After his death in 1931, the ownership and occupancy varied. It was vacant for a spell. Parts of the extensive tract, which were in 3 separate towns, were developed. But on this site, the house lasted into the 1960s. I haven't been able to locate an exact date and in time was raised. It was on the highest spot in Red Bank, and it was acquired by the local water utility who who knew it was a great place to provide gravity flow for water. Now, you can still see the site readily identifiable by a water tank cover for the underground tank. And there are a few exterior stairs that led to the house that are still visible, a reminder of lost grandeur.
So
So
there's nothing there that now?
Hilltop Road, is it Hilltop Road in Red Bank? Is it located on Hilltop?
It's on Tower Hill, around Tower Hill.
The church, but across the.
On the other
across
side, on the other side of the street. Ross Fenton Farm had it all, named for Charles J. Ross and Mabel Fenton. They had fighters, booze, stage performers, and high-flying nightlife. Now, it didn't originate by Ross and Fenton, but they are the owners most fondly associated with the place. Alcohol was a key part of the appeal there. Restrictions on the sale of alcohol may have been loosely enforced, other than a purity zone around Ocean Grove that in the area during the 1880s was 1 mile from the bridge separating the Grove from Asbury Park. The farm, former name of this, was just outside the limit. Ulick, who built it, was indicted for illegal sales in 1888, entered a no contest plea, then absconded prior to sentencing that November. The historical record of the place in the early 1890s is unknown prior to its reported sale in November 1894 to Nellie Garrett of New York, who backed out 2 months later with the loss of the deposit after she learned of the dismal reputation of the place. But Ross and Fenton were entertainers, vaudeville entertainers. They needed a summer respite, and they built this place into a popular draw that after their deaths still maintained a high profile in the entertainment field. Skipping over highlights only, since time is going to become an issue. Here's another one in the nostalgia area, the Circus Drive-In. And the drive-in has an interesting origin. It was on Route 35 in Wall. Why was it so popular? Well, the great sign helped, but mainly through the efforts of the Friedells, who opened the place in 1954. And they were quite successful in instilling loyalty among their customers and employees. But what was the drive-in? The drive-in originated in the West, where the diner of the other roadside legendary culinary landmark was regarded as an invasive species from the Northeast. The Pig Stand, opened on the Dallas-Fort Worth Highway in 1921 by J.G. Kirby, a candy and tobacco wholesaler, became the first drive-in. The Pig Stand distinguished itself from prosaic refreshment stands by curb service to the motorist. The proliferation of drive-ins was aided by the post-World War II boom in consumer spending, prolific sales of newly available automobiles, and the movement to suburbia. The drive-in represented not only a low-cost option for the growing trend of families eating out, but it also obviated the need for diners to dress up. The truly lazy did not even have to leave their cars. Drive-in restaurants, which waxed and waned over the third quarter of the 20th century, faced insuperable competition from the late 1970s from fast food chains, especially national chains that developed a customer base through proliferation and extensive advertising. Perhaps rising land values on an intensively developed highway made the demise of the Circus Drive-in inevitable. The Friedells sold the place in 2004. A later owner raised the drive-in on May 9, 2018, the sign remained as a forlorn reminder until it was removed on August 27, 2021, and placed in storage with hope that it would rise again. What its status is now, I don't know. Segregated schools, another one with a red bank a connection, but I'm going to focus on a different one. The one in Asbury Park, where all three of them in the book, including Freehold, had a common purpose, the separation of the races. Now, distinguished Asbury Park architect Ernest Aaron, who lived in Red Bank, created an innovative design for the Bannings Avenue School in Asbury Park, completed in 1913. The school educated its two student bodies in a double school building that was depicted in the February 1914 School Board Journal. The article stated, quote, "The building in fact is two independent and complete schools connected by an assembly hall accessible to both. The largest section facing an important thoroughfare of the city, Banks Avenue, is occupied by white children, and the smaller section with its main entrance on Madison Avenue accommodates the colored pupils. An auditorium located between the two brought the respective student bodies together on necessity." Now, even segregation had its innovation. This also depicts the Court Street School in Freehold and the Red Bank School, which is no longer a school, but it just shows how far they went to keep the races apart. I think I'm going to end the narration now and show a few pictures of things that are still there, but the usage is gone. The horses are gone from the Lincroft section of Middletown where you had two amazing horse farms, but much of the built environment is preserved and can be seen at Thompson Park. The Players Boat Club in Fairhaven was built by Ford Billions, which became a fading entertainment form. Eventually, the club was taken over by actual Mariners and survives in a different building. And the present building was entered on the National Register of Historic Places, thanks to my efforts. Jersey homesteads, the borough of Roosevelt. I think it's reasonably well known that it was founded as a resettlement community for Jewish needleworkers in New York. The original purpose failed, but the built environment remains, but unfortunately is under intense pressure for change since the original houses are hardly deemed adequate and have been many altered. And then finally, we have the Eisner building. I think in these parts, it's well known that Eisner was once the largest uniform manufacturer in the world. The business rose and fell with demands largely fueled by war. The needle trades went south. The future of the building was in doubt for a while, and of course was resurrected as the Galleria. So the purpose is lost, but the building remains. I might add, it's not in the book, there's one other lost Red Bank location, the Stacy Pitcher House. Did anyone ever hear of Stacy Pitcher? He was prominent in his time, but doesn't have much of a biography, but he built a very fine-looking Italian villa house right here. Now, historic houses are usually known for the builder, but in this instance, Sigmund Eisner bought the place, remodeled it in the then current colonial revival style. You'll have to see a picture of the Stacy Pitcher House, which is in the Red Bank on the Navesink book, to decide which you prefer. I'm not going to say here, but the core of the building is gone, but the design is lost. Well, there's much more in the book. There are a couple of other Red Bank sites in here, including the Globe Hotel. And despite what you may have read elsewhere, there's nothing remaining of the Old Globe Hotel, and the Red Bank Opera House. So I think we have time for a few questions, but I also would like you to have the opportunity to buy the book or the other Red Bank volumes that are with me. But who would?
Where is the Red Bank Opera House, or where was it?
It was where the City Center Plaza was.
Yes.
Maple and Front.
It's
Opposite the big office
Dunkin'
building.
Donuts.
The Red Bank Opera House is written in the context of three opera houses, explained as a building and entertainment type of the latter 19th century. That wasn't exactly built for opera, but was often used as a theater. It's a very interesting chapter in architectural entertainment history.
They used to have the graduations there too, the high school graduations were at the Opera House.
Back in the
Oh,
early days.
okay. Yeah, it was a public meeting hall, as opera houses typically were. But they had all sorts of entertainment there.
And there was a dairy farm right at Monmouth University.
Excuse me?
There was a dairy farm where Monmouth University.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There were quite a few farms there. There's a great entry on Monmouth University in my book, Long Branch, Reinventing a Resort.